Nobody prepares you for the moment you realize your wife is rooting for the cancer. Not the doctors. Not the pamphlets they hand you at the oncology center, with their careful, optimistic language. Not the counselors who talk about leaning on your support system, as though your support system hasn't already packed up emotionally and started building a life without you. I was 48 years old, sitting in a treatment center in Houston, Texas, fighting the hardest battle of my life. And the person who was supposed to be in my corner had already left. She just hadn't told me yet. Before we go deeper into the story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you're new here, welcome to Dad's Raw Revenge. Claire and I had been married for 13 years. I loved Claire the way good men love, without conditions, without keeping score, without ever once making her feel like she had to earn it. I was her husband in the truest sense of that word. I showed up every day, in every way that mattered. I built my entire life around making sure Claire Anderson felt chosen. Every single day. I thought that meant something to her. Turns out it just meant she had more time to make other plans. Looking back now, and I have had a lot of time to look back, I can see the cracks that were always there. Claire loved the life I built more than she loved me. She loved the vacations and the car, and the way people looked at her when she walked into a room on my arm. She loved what Joe Anderson provided. Joe Anderson himself was, I suspect, always optional. What a fool I was. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday morning in February. Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. My oncologist, Dr. Williams, a calm, precise man who had clearly delivered this sentence 1,000 times and still somehow made it feel personal, walked me through everything with the quiet efficiency of someone building a house in a hurricane. Chemotherapy. 6 cycles. I sat in that chair and I didn't hear half of what he said, because all I could think about was Claire. I drove home, walked into our kitchen where she was making dinner, and I told her. Claire cried. Real tears. She held me right there at the kitchen counter in Katy, Texas, and she said, "We're going to fight this together, Joe. I'm not going anywhere." I believed her. That's almost funny to me now. We had a daughter, Amelia, 7 years old, with my eyes and Claire's smile. She was the best thing we had ever done together. The one thing in our marriage that was completely, undeniably real. 3 weeks into my diagnosis, Claire sat me down and told me she was sending Amelia to stay with her mother. She said it made sense. Said the treatment would be hard, and a 7-year-old didn't need to see that. Said it was the practical thing to do. I agreed. I thought she was protecting our daughter. She was clearing the house. Exactly 16 days after my diagnosis, Trevor showed up in our lives. He was a man Claire had met at some charity gala 5 months before the cancer. A contact saved quietly in her phone. A door she had left cracked open and apparently decided, now that I was conveniently preoccupied with trying not to die, to walk straight through. His name was Trevor. His last name is not worth remembering. He was the guy Claire apparently found compelling enough to detonate 13 years of marriage for. The changes in Claire came the way all the worst things come, slowly and then all at once. First it was the hospital visits. My treatment sessions ran every 3 weeks down at MD Anderson Cancer Center, and in the beginning Claire came. Then she came late. Then she didn't come and texted instead. Stuck at a meeting, babe. You got this. Then she stopped texting altogether. Then came the phone. Claire had never been precious about her phone before. We were the kind of couple who knew each other's passcodes, who handed phones across the dinner table to share videos. Suddenly her phone was always face down. Suddenly she took it to the bathroom. Suddenly she laughed at things she didn't share. Then came the flinching. I reached for her hand one evening on the couch, and she pulled back, just slightly, just a fraction, the way you pull back from something you no longer want to touch. I noticed every single thing. I was sick. I was not blind. But I want you to understand what chemotherapy does to a person. It is not tiredness. It is something deeper and stranger, a heaviness that lives in your bones and makes even thinking feel like labor. I didn't have the energy to open that conversation, so I filed it away. I told myself I was paranoid. I told myself the treatment was making me dark. I was not paranoid. Dr. Williams noticed before I said a single word about it. Somewhere around my 3rd session, he started asking different questions. How was my support system at home? Was I eating? Was someone driving me to these appointments? The questions sounded clinical, but his eyes were doing something else entirely. He had watched that space beside me, session after session, stay empty while other patients had their people next to them, spouses, siblings, friends. Somebody. Joe Anderson had nobody. He never said anything directly. That wasn't his place. But I saw him see it. And that, somehow, was its own quiet kind of shame. Meanwhile, Claire had begun performing widowhood. Not privately. Publicly. She told people at our neighbor's dinner party that she was essentially doing this alone. She accepted sympathy with the practiced grace of someone who had rehearsed it in the mirror. She started referring to her schedule, her plans, her future. Always singular, always hers, never ours. She had started erasing me. And I was still sleeping in our bed. It was a Thursday afternoon in March, when I found out exactly how far gone she already was. They sent me home early from a session. I had gotten used to doing everything myself. There was never anyone else. So I called an Uber. The ride was quiet, too quiet for my liking, and I barely noticed the passing streets until we pulled into the driveway of my house in Katy, Texas, at 2:30 in the afternoon. I heard her before I even got the door open. Claire was in the kitchen, on the phone, and she was laughing, not a polite laugh, not a social laugh, but a real, loose, unguarded laugh, the kind I hadn't heard from her in months. The kind she used to laugh with me. I stood in the hallway of my own house with my jacket still on and my hospital bracelet still on my wrist, and I listened. Girl, I've basically been a widow for months already. Laughter. Fingers crossed it wraps up soon. More laughter. Trevor and I are looking at moving in together. I just need a little more time. She wasn't whispering. She had stopped caring enough to whisper. I stood there, a man with chemotherapy still moving through his blood. A man who had spent that morning being poked with needles. A man who had turned on the heated blanket for this woman for 13 years. And I listened to my wife say those words. Fingers crossed it wraps up soon. About her husband. With cancer. I did not walk into that kitchen. I did not call her name. I turned around. I went upstairs. I sat down on the bathroom floor with my back against the tub. And I stayed there for a long time. Not crying. Just breathing. Just letting the thing I had been refusing to know become something I now absolutely, completely, undeniably knew. My wife was not waiting to see if I survived. She was waiting for me to hurry up and not. And somewhere during those minutes on that bathroom floor, with the cold tile underneath me and the Houston traffic humming faintly outside, something inside me stopped breaking and started building. She had made her calculation. Now I was going to make mine. It got worse before I could act on that thought. Because of course it did. About 2 weeks later I found out, not from Claire, not from anyone who had the decency to tell me directly, but from a quiet word a neighbor let slip, that Claire had been telling people she was a widow, present tense, while I was still alive, still going to treatment, still sleeping in our house. She had told people at a gathering that she was on her own now, that she was moving forward. She had already buried me in conversation. She just hadn't gotten around to telling me. And then, because apparently the universe wanted to make absolutely sure I had the full picture, I came home from a session one evening and found Trevor sitting at my kitchen table. In my house, at my table, eating what appeared to be my food. Claire stood by the kitchen counter with her arms folded, and the expression of someone who had been waiting for this exact moment and was mildly irritated it had taken this long to arrive. Joe, she said, not. I'm sorry, not. Let me explain. Just my name. Like a period at the end of a sentence she had already finished writing. Joe, you need to be realistic. You might not make it. I have to think about my future. Okay, I said. Trevor was still seated. He had the decency to look at his plate. 1 point for Trevor. I told him to get out of my house immediately. He came close, looked at me and told Claire, call me when you're done. And I felt something move inside me. Not shatter, not collapse, but shift. Like a gear that had been grinding, finally clicking into the right position. I went upstairs, I got into bed, and while Claire stayed downstairs in the kitchen, in the house I had built and paid for, I stared at the ceiling in the dark and I made a decision so quiet it didn't make a sound. I was going to survive this cancer. And then I was going to make sure Claire didn't get a single thing she was counting on. This was not a woman waiting to see if her husband pulled through. This was a woman calculating the value of his death. And she was doing it while I was still very much alive, and, as she was about to find out, very much paying attention. That night I lay on the bathroom floor one more time, not out of despair, not this time. I lay there and I thought about everything I still had. My daughter, My sister Nicole, who had been calling me every single day since the diagnosis and driving up from her place whenever I'd let her. My lawyer's number saved on my phone. My financial advisor who had known me for 15 years. And a mind that still worked, even when my body was fighting a war. Claire thought cancer had made me weak. She had fundamentally misunderstood what it had made me. It made me precise. Let me tell you what nobody tells you about fighting cancer while your wife is cheating on you. You have to choose, every single morning, which battle gets your energy. And I chose wrong for too long. I spent weeks grieving Claire when I should have been building. Lying in that bed after treatment, nauseated and hollow, replaying the phone call. Fingers crossed it wraps up soon, running it on a loop like a song you hate but can't get out of your head. Wasting the little energy I had on a woman who was out there spending my money and sleeping next to another man, and telling her friends she was basically a widow. I was grieving someone who was still alive and completely unbothered. That had to stop. So I stopped. The hardest part of those weeks, harder than the treatment, harder than watching Claire disappear in real time, was not having Amelia home. I called her every night at 7 o'clock without fail. Her grandmother would hand her the phone, and she'd say, "Daddy, are you still sick?" And I'd say, "Getting better every day, baby." And she'd say, "Okay, because I made you a drawing." Every single night. A new drawing. One night, somewhere in the middle of April, she asked me something I was not prepared for. "Daddy, how come Mommy never calls me?" I held the phone and I looked at the ceiling and I said, "Mommy's been very busy, baby." Busy with what? I was speechless. I said, "Don't worry, baby. Mommy will call you soon." She accepted that the way 7-year-olds accept things, completely and temporarily, and moved on to telling me about the drawing she had made that day. Days later, Nicole showed up at my place with 3 bags of groceries, a look on her face that could strip paint, and absolutely zero tolerance for nonsense. My little sister, 39 years old, the kind of woman who will hug you until you cry and then hand you a lawyer's business card before you've finished wiping your face. She walked into my kitchen, looked around, and she turned to me with a very specific expression. "Joe, where is she?" "Out." She nodded slowly, set the groceries down, started putting things away. And when she finally turned back around, her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set. And she said, "Okay, here's what's going to happen. I'm driving you to every session from now on. Every single one. And you are going to eat something today, even if I have to sit here and watch every bite. And then," she paused, "you're going to tell me what you need, and we are going to get it done. All of it. You hear me?" I nodded. "I saw something," I said to Nicole. I hadn't planned to say it. It just came out. Nicole turned around slowly. "What did you see?" Her phone. She left it on the counter face up. WhatsApp messages with Trevor. And she told him the life insurance payout would be massive, that she doubted I'd beat it anyway, that they just needed to be patient. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I've ever heard. Nicole put both hands flat on the counter, breathed. "She said that while you're still." "Yes." She turned around and faced the window above the sink for a long moment. When she turned back, her voice was completely different. Quieter. Slower. The way a person sounds when they are choosing every single word carefully because the alternative is saying something they can't take back. "Joe," she said, "you need to call your lawyer, not next week, this week." "I already have an appointment," I said. And for the first time in months, my sister smiled. If you've been following for a while, take a second to hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed. Let me be honest about what those treatment weeks actually looked like, because I want you to feel it. Not just hear it. The drive to MD Anderson took 40 minutes from Katy on a good traffic day, which in Houston means it took anywhere between 40 minutes and the rest of your natural life. Nicole drove. Every time. She'd pick me up at 7:30 in the morning. She paid attention to what I needed. The sessions themselves lasted hours. I was always alone. No one was waiting for me, except now Nicole was around. And I cannot tell you, I genuinely cannot find the words, what it meant to look over and see someone there. Just someone there. It sounds small. It was enormous. It was during one of those sessions that Dr. Williams asked Nicole to step into the corridor with him for a moment. I watched them through the glass. I couldn't hear anything. I saw Dr. Williams speak. I saw Nicole nod. I saw her face do something complicated and then go still. They were out there maybe 4 minutes, and then Nicole came back in and sat down and picked up her coffee cup and stared at it. What did he say? I asked. She took a breath. He said, she stopped, started again. He said you're one of the strongest people he's ever had in that chair, just as a person. He said he's watched that chair next to you sit empty session after session, and he wanted me to know, her voice caught, he wanted me to know that he sees it. What you've been carrying in here alone. I looked at the wall, I nodded once, and we sat there together in that room, and neither of us said another word for a long time. That is the moment right there, when I understood that what Claire had done was not just a betrayal of me. It was a betrayal of the version of us that other people could see clearly, even when I was too close to it to name it. Dr. Williams had watched. He had kept his professional silence, but he had watched. The empty chair had told him everything. While Nicole drove me to MD Anderson during the weekdays, I called my lawyer on Saturday mornings. His name was Mike Dawson. 30 years in family law, the kind of attorney who listens to everything you say and writes down only the things that matter, and then at the end looks at you over his glasses and says exactly what needs to happen next. I told Mike everything. He listened. He wrote. And we got to work. Claire had no idea. She was too busy making plans to notice I was making mine. She had grown almost breathtakingly careless by this point, emboldened by my silence, convinced that I was too broken to fight back. She stopped hiding Trevor entirely. She brought him around openly. One evening she walked past me in the hallway and said, almost as an aside, I deserve to be happy too, Joe. I looked at her. Okay, I said. She took that as acceptance. She had no idea it was a receipt. She was so certain I still loved her enough to do nothing. That certainty was the most expensive mistake she ever made. The scan results were finally out. The critical one. The one that would tell us whether the treatment was working. Whether all of those mornings dragging myself out of bed had actually done anything. Claire was not there. She was away for the weekend with Trevor. She had told me Thursday evening, casually, so I went alone. I sat across from Dr. Williams in his office, and he slid the results across the desk, and he told me in that calm, precise way of his that the treatment was retreating, that we were not out of the woods, but we were moving through them, in the right direction. He said more after that, I know he did. I nodded in the right places, but inside I had gone completely still. I was going to survive. I drove back to Katie alone, parked in the driveway, sat in the car for a full hour, and just sat. Let it move through me. The relief, the grief, the anger, and somewhere underneath all of it, something that felt almost like gratitude. Not for what I'd been through, for what had become clear. I was going to make it, and when I did, I was going to make it without Claire. Not to win something, but because I had spent 13 years loving a woman who had looked at my situation and done the math on everything I owned. And I deserved better than that. Every man who has ever loved someone the way I loved her deserves better than that. Nicole called while I was still sitting in the driveway. I picked up on the first ring. Well? She said. It's working, I told her. The sound she made on the other end of that phone, I will carry that sound with me for the rest of my life. That night I lay in bed in the house. Claire was already mentally redecorating, and I stared at the ceiling and I felt something settle inside me. Not peace. Not yet. But something close to it. The quiet, solid feeling of a decision that has been made and will not be unmade. I was going to survive the cancer. I had already survived Claire. The paperwork was almost ready. It was almost time. Mike Dawson had the divorce papers ready. I could have had them delivered, clean, distant, professional. Mike actually recommended it. I told him I'd handle it myself. Joe, he started. Mike, I said, I want to see her face. He paused. Then, and I'll never forget this, he smiled and said, all right then, call me after. I drove back to Katie with the envelope on the passenger seat. I walked into my house one final time as Claire's husband. She was in the living room. On the phone, naturally. She looked up when I walked in with that particular expression she had developed over the last few months. The one that said my presence in my own home was a mild inconvenience. We need to talk, I said. I'm busy, Joe. Claire. Something in my voice made her lower the phone. I held out the envelope. She looked at it, took it, opened it, read it. And then Claire did something I was not fully prepared for, even though I should have been. She laughed, not nervously, not in shock. A genuine, relieved, full-throated laugh. The laugh of a woman who has been waiting for a bus that has finally arrived. Finally, she said, the actual word. Joe, honestly, I've been wanting this since the diagnosis, since the very beginning. She said it without thinking, without a single moment of awareness that she had just handed me a confession, so complete that Mike would later call it, and I am quoting my attorney here, a gift. She had never intended to stay. She had bet against me from day one, and she was still, right now, certain she was holding the winning hand. I looked at her for a long moment. "Thank you," I said, "for being honest." And I walked out. Claire called her lawyer within the hour. Confident, almost cheerful. She had been waiting for this, 13 years of marriage in Texas. The house, the joint assets, the accounts. She had done her own math and she liked her numbers just fine. She told Trevor that evening they were going to be fine. Better than fine. What Claire did not know, what she could not have known because she had never once taken me seriously enough to watch me carefully, was what Mike and I had built over those quiet months. The proceedings told the whole story. The house she had been mentally redecorating for Trevor, my separate property bought years before I ever met her, never refinanced with her name on it. She had no claim to it. She just assumed she did. The joint accounts she had been spending freely for months. Separated, repositioned, every dollar accounted for and protected. The investments she had factored into her future, gone from her name entirely. And somewhere in those proceedings the full picture of Claire emerged. Not just the woman who had an affair, but the woman who had sat in her home while I was still in treatment fighting for my life, and typed out a WhatsApp message to another man telling him the life insurance payout would be massive, that she doubted I'd beat it anyway, that they just needed to be patient. Some things don't need to be evidence to be devastating. And then there was Amelia. Mike laid out Claire's conduct with the quiet efficiency of a man who has seen everything and is no longer surprised by any of it. The judge asked Claire what parenting plan she proposed. Claire asked for every other weekend. The judge asked why not more. Claire said she needed time to build her new life. The judge, a woman, said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, "So granted, primary custody to Mr. Anderson." Claire didn't fight it. She was already thinking about Trevor. Claire's own choices, documented, consistent, and completely voluntary, had told the court everything it needed to know about her priorities. She had walked into this divorce certain she held every card. She was holding nothing. She had to tell Trevor. And she did not tell him privately. She told him at dinner. At a restaurant in Houston they apparently went to regularly, comfortable enough in their relationship to have a regular spot. And Trevor listened to Claire explain that the house was gone. The accounts were not what she had described. The future she had painted for him had been built on money that was no longer hers. Houston is a big city with a surprisingly small social orbit when you've lived there long enough. Someone at a nearby table recognized her, watched Trevor's face go through its changes, the confusion, the calculation, the cold arithmetic of a man reassessing a situation in real time. Trevor put his napkin down. "So there's nothing," he said. Not a question. "Trevor, we can still." "Claire." He said her name the same flat way I had said it in that living room. Like a period. "There's nothing." He left her sitting there, at the table, in the restaurant, in front of people who knew her name, with the bill. Word travels fast in the social circles Claire had spent 13 years carefully cultivating. The dinner parties, the neighborhood gatherings, the friendships built around the lifestyle my income had provided. The same friends who had listened to her describe herself as essentially a widow. The same women who had nodded sympathetically while she performed her grief, and talked about moving forward, and said things like, "Fingers crossed, it wraps up soon," about a man who was still very much alive, and paying attention. They heard about the restaurant. They heard about the assets. They heard about Amelia, and the sympathy that had been extended to poor Claire, the woman bravely soldiering through hardship while her sick husband clung on, quietly, efficiently, and completely evaporated. Because it turned out Claire had not been a tragic figure bravely facing an impossible situation. She had been planning a hostile takeover of a dying man's life. And the man hadn't died. The calls slowed, then stopped. The invitations disappeared. The social world Claire had curated so carefully closed its doors on her one by one, with the particular quiet efficiency of people who have decided, without announcement, that they are done. Claire had bet on my death and lost. And everyone knew it. Months later, the divorce was finalized. Mike called. 2 words. "It's done." "Thank you, Mike," I said. I hung up, and I sat in that quiet for a long time. Not celebrating, not replaying Claire's face, Not running the victory lap I think some people expected. Just sitting, breathing, feeling the particular lightness of a man who has set down something extraordinarily heavy and is only now remembering what it feels like to stand up straight. Claire walked out of 13 years with what she walked in with. Nothing she had planned for. Nothing she had calculated. Nothing she had laughed about on the phone on a Thursday afternoon while her husband stood in the hallway with a hospital bracelet on his wrist. Nothing. She got Trevor. And Trevor, as it turned out, was not a long-term proposition either. He simply left. Because Trevor had not signed up to start from scratch. He had been attracted to a lifestyle, a future, a payout that was never going to come. He had looked at Claire's actual situation and done his own math. His math said, this isn't worth it. So he went. Nicole told me over the phone. I could hear in her voice that she was waiting for me to celebrate, to say something satisfying. I thought about it for a second. I said. That's it? Nicole, I stopped caring about Claire on a bathroom floor in March. Trevor leaving her is her problem. I don't have Claire problems anymore. A pause. I really love you, my sister said. I know. I hung up and went back to what I was doing. That was the whole reaction. Not because I'm a saint. I am absolutely not a saint. But because the grief was genuinely gone. I had processed Claire while I was surviving her. By the time the punishment arrived, I had already moved on to living. That, more than any legal victory, is the most satisfying thing I can tell you. She no longer had the power to make me feel anything at all. The final scan came back clean a few months later. Dr. Williams said the word remission, and I shook his hand and walked to my car and sat there for 20 minutes, just staring through the windshield at the MD Anderson parking structure. Remission. I had made it. Nicole threw dinner together that same evening. Her place. No planning. Just family appearing the way family does when the news is too big to sit with alone. Her husband, Ben, fired up the grill. The kids ran screaming through the backyard, in the particular joyful chaos of children who have no idea how much the adults around them have been through, and are simply glad everyone is there. I sat on Nicole's porch with a cold drink and I watched all of it, and I felt something I hadn't felt in so long I had almost forgotten what it was called. Peace. Real, solid, unperformed peace. Amelia came and climbed onto the chair beside me after dinner, my daughter, 7 years old. The little girl who had asked me every night for months if Daddy was still sick, and somehow never once lost faith that I was coming back to her. She looked up at me with that serious face she gets, the one that means she has something important to say, and then she tucked herself against my side like it was the most natural thing in the world, like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Within 10 minutes she was asleep on my shoulder, my Amelia, the man who was supposed to be on the ground by now. My phone buzzed on the armrest. I looked at it. Claire's name. I looked at it for exactly as long as it took me to remember. I placed the phone face down on the armrest, looked back at Amelia asleep on my shoulder, looked out at the backyard where Nicole was laughing at something Ben said and the kids were still running. I had already grieved Claire, months ago, on my bathroom floor in Katy, Texas. She was somewhere in this city tonight with nothing she planned for and no one she counted on. And I was here, alive, whole, unbothered, free. With my daughter asleep on my shoulder. I was busy living. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments.